Hello everyone and welcome back to Critique Clinic, the video series where we give our patrons and you advice on how you can improve your miniature painting.
We've got some fantastic submissions today to have a look at, so without further ado, let's jump in.
Okay, first up we've got DJ Logan Sammer.
The man, the myth, the legend of music.
It's quite cool, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it's good.
Fun to see.
Good.
Looking to improve on this. Definitely the brush control has room for improvement, but I would love some feedback on the things I probably haven't seen myself. So not only is Logan Sammer a very talented and successful DJ, but also Blood Angels fan and a fantastic painter.
Chose right chapter, and the execution is very, very, very good.
Overall, this is super well painted, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really, really well done. And like we were talking obviously about the things we wanted to just cover on it, and truth be told, it was actually quite hard to find like a lot of things that are like incorrect in the sense of like a factual look at it, and there's something that could have lots of refinement. I think you've actually done really, really well.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is just going to be sort of subjective feedback and maybe point you in the direction of things you could sharpen up. But it's going to be quite granular feedback, really, because overall there's no like real mistakes on this. I don't feel.
No, I agree completely.
Okay, opening up then. I think one of the things I noticed actually first up, particularly when looking at this model from multiple angles, is I've noticed there's a little bit of lack of tonal variation in and amongst the metallics.
Yeah.
So, for example, there's when you're looking at the model from the front, it's very, very visually interesting. So there's a lot of like different colors and materials. But when you look at it from some of the other angles, some of the sort of less flattering angles, I think it's just lacking a bit of visual interest for me. So, example being, he's got the sort of bionic arm here, which has been painted with like a sort of dark silver, which I think is absolutely fine. But then it's basically the same color. It would appear to be used as the grip of the pistol and also on the muzzle as well.
Muzzle as well, yeah.
So I think for me, that's just, a bit of a missed opportunity to add some visual interest, because this to me just sort of bleeds as almost like one big thing, but it's actually quite a detailed sort of parts. You've got sort of obviously the arm itself, but then also the weapon is detailed as well.
Yeah, I know. I agree completely.
Getting a bit lost for me, I think.
Yeah, I think as well with the gold in some areas, you could just add a bit more tone to it, like add a bit more shade into it in some areas, just to really help define the details. I said it's nice and pin shaded as it is, but I think you could just push it a little bit more and add a little bit more contrast to them. You
could also experiment with like different gold paints just to break it up a little bit, I think, because everything being the exact same gold just kind of makes it read, more, I don't think it draws the eye quite as much potentially.
No, you're quite right, and I think because of the chapter that he's from as well, like they're very artificer in the way that they are. So like you can add loads of different interests, like different golds and things like that. I think like going back to the arm that you were talking about, George. I think like same as the muzzle, like on the Inferno pistol, you could easily make that potentially a different silver or even like a copper or like a gold. Or you could just give him something like that. Like that sounds silly, but like, you really wanted to make him look a bit OG, you give him like a gold hand, like a gold bionic hand or something like that. So it just adds that sort of artistic artificer kind of flair to the model just by using paint as well. And it'll break up that all that silver and black next to each other.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, I think that would be quite good.
In terms of the red armor, everything's like really, really neat, isn't it? It's nice multiple stage edge highlights.
Yeah.
I'll caveat what I'm about to say is in terms of this might be in terms of photography. So this may not apply. But it feels a little bit desaturated to me in terms of the highlight color choice. Maybe it's like a little bit too pastel-y, making the red not quite appear as vibrant as the mid-tone suggests it might be. Again, that might just be sort of lighting, just washing this out a little bit. But I would say I prefer personally to go for quite sort of vibrant orange highlights on my, heavy metal style edge highlights for red. I think it can make the armor appear quite a bit more saturated than it's coming across here.
The pin shading has been done really well as well. That nice color use. That I was going to say with the edging as well. I think like your edging on your armor is really good. But I think if you look here, the sort of segments of like the power fist are actually quite hard to highlight. Being honest with you, as in they're quite blocky shapes, but they're almost rounded a little bit as well. So I think again, if I was to be really critical of anything, I'd probably say just sharpen these up and cut in with the black again into them, just to sharpen these up a bit more. This is more of an opinionated statement than a factual one, but like there's some rivets here on the armor, like just to add interest to like quite a large area of like red. You could just paint these rivets in silver or even gold if you wanted to add a bit more sort of like an elegant kind of feel to it. The other thing I noticed as well, it's just something I wanted to comment on, was obviously this knee pad. I love the fact you've done obviously a bit of a free-handed designer here. It shows really good brush control, which is great. I'm imagining that these are supposed to be like blocks or squares. I think like not all of them are perfectly square. Like say this one here is quite good, but then some of these ones look more like pointed, if that makes sense. So I think just go in and resharpen some of these and redefine these. Also, George and I were talking about this. This is a knee pad. that normal, you've done a vertical edge here, and I can see on a white edge and also like a grey edge on the black. There's no panel line here. Obviously, it's just a knee pad. So like it doesn't really need the edge because there's no panel line there. Across the top, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And on the underneath, yeah, that's fine. But I wouldn't personally put a panel line or an edge section, put an edge highlight on the two sections of it personally.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's something you see quite often emulated on sort of flat surfaces because it's like the heavy metal edge highlighted style. I think there's an instinctive tendency to just put edges everywhere, just where colors meet, kind of regardless of if it's a true edge or not. Yeah. Again, that's kind of like
it's more of an opinion than
for sure.
But if you want to, if you want to do that, that's fine. That's not a problem.
That being said, I would say if you were going to do it, maybe commit to doing it the whole way down.
Yeah, I agree.
And you might kind of sell that panel line because I see that there is a sort of black line down the center here.
Yeah,
I think you might sell that a bit more if you sort of fully committed to the edge highlight the whole way down.
Yeah.
I think one final thing, just to sort of round this out as well, is I noticed with the sort of vials, and there's a lot of like blood drops and things on this being a blood angel, obviously. An idea to add some additional contrast. For me, contrast isn't just in terms of like color values, but it's also in terms of sort of surface finish. One thing that's, again, this is entirely preference, but one thing that's quite easy to do is just add some gloss varnish with a brush to the vials, to the gems, to the lenses and things like that. Just makes them stand out a little bit more. It makes them appear a bit more saturated and kind of definitely sells that gem reflective stone effect a little bit better.
Yeah, 100%. And like you're talking about the blood vial, to me, it's a little bit desaturated. Like you'd want that potentially to be a bit more bright. I know there's a lot of red on the model as it is. And it's kind of like a browny red, which I get obviously if it's old blood, I understand that. But like I would definitely just make it for interest purposes. I'd make sure that it's like a bit brighter. So overall, a fantastic submission, removing all of my personal bias. But yeah, I thought it was very, very well executed.
Yeah, lovely piece. Thank you very much for submitting. Okay, next up we have Twisted Tree returning again, who says, trying to take on board the feedback you've given previously with this veteran sergeant. He's not actually in a diorama. I just magnetized his feet so he can go in different settings. That's quite a cool idea.
That's good. So another great submission from Twisted Tree. Some really great areas of detail on this miniature and great progress. It's really nice to see your painting come on from previous submissions. When we had a look at it, there was a couple of areas where we just thought we'd give some feedback and comments on. I'm going to start with the purity seals. I think like text, just to caveat this, text is like really hard. And it's not like something that's like really easy to sort of render and actually paint. You do have to have a lot of brush control to get it really refined. I do actually like the fact you put like lots of different colors on there, I think. But one thing to be conscious of is that what happens is that like if you put too much on there in the sense of the different colors and stuff, it starts looking less like ancient parchment or old sort of like parchment and more like they're wearing strips from like a magazine or something hanging off of the armor, you know. And I think that's one of the things to be conscious with. So like I'd personally recommend probably sticking to one extra color. So maybe be it red, be it blue, be it something like that. I think pick one which works quite well. Most notably, probably red works the best because then that way it has a really good contrast value to the actual parchment color.
One thing I would say actually with these as well is consider after you've applied the wash to the parchment, I would actually be highlighting it first before you put the text on there, because this to me, it is quite obvious that it's just sort of had a wash put over it and then text on top, if that makes sense. I think it kind of desaturates it and gives it sort of the wrong tone than you're necessarily going for, because of the way that sort of the crumples and the fabric work. I think you end up with quite a lot of wash pooling and the color gets quite away from the sort of bleached old paper look. That's something I see quite often. And I think in the context of, like I say, everything's about context. So in the context of a bigger miniature where you've spent lots of time highlighting everything, something like that to me is a bit distracting because it's almost like it's had less effort on it, if that makes sense. Whereas everything else over here is, you know, it's got its base coat, mid-tone, recess shade, highlight. This to me looks like base coat and wash, if that makes sense. It's kind of quite apparent just in terms of like sort of the finish of it as well. It, like I say, it makes it stand out more than it does because you've done a nice job of everything else. It's just sort of viewing it in context in that way for me. No,
definitely. I think one of the things as well, again, it's just brush control. It's just like, you've definitely got great control of the brush. If you look at like the scratches that are just opposite the sort of purity seals here, you can paint some nice sharp straight lines. I think the more you practice that, the better that your script and actual text is going to be done. Don't just paint lines because that still doesn't read right. What I'd probably recommend you do is like do some squiggles and stuff, and then break the squiggles up by gaps, and also by adding like little vertical above the line and beneath the line, little extra notches onto that line, and it will just visually make it look a bit more interesting, and also make it look more like it's actual text than just straight lines or squiggly lines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a good brush control exercise, I think, that, because you get quite a lot of extra purity seals with quite a lot of kits. So I think if you've got any extras, in your bits box or left over from when you finish assembling your models, I think maybe just keep those on hand and just have a practice, and don't paint loads in one go, but maybe just take one, paint it, and try and paint the text as neat and sharp as you can. Then once you've done that, get another one, try it again, and you'll notice that as you go through, say, 3 or 4 or 5 of those, by the time you get to the last one, you'll find that you probably are getting quite a lot more sharper and sort of thinner sort of line weight. You could almost try to think of it as, painting in a smaller font, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%.
Another thing I think as well, James noted this already, but you've got some like nice sharp scratches on the back of the fist here, which I think is quite nice and sharp and neat, and it's sort of fitting with the sort of heavy metal style of edge highlighting. But I think when I look at that effect being done elsewhere on the miniature, it doesn't quite read the same to me. In particular, I'm thinking of sort of around this sort of abdomen section down here. It looks like there's some scratching done as well. I'm not sure if you use like a different technique to try and sell that, but to me, this looks a lot sharper and neater and more refined than this. Seeing it as well down here on the feet as well. So I think, you're clearly capable of doing that. So I think whatever you've done over here, I think that should be probably the way to go with trying to get away with the sort of damaged effects, because I think it works everywhere else that you've done it, like in particular with the black. So you've got the section on the shoulder pad as well. But you've got the nice sharp, neat edge highlights elsewhere on the grey armour. But to me, this doesn't quite work.
No, definitely. I agree completely. The other thing I just wanted to throw into the mix is there's some really good rope details on the chest of the model that I think you've done really well. You've highlighted each of the little coils of the rope. If you have a look at the red one, and this is purely been highlighted again by the fact that George has gone on, was explained about the scratches on the abdomen. The same sort of like segments of that rope on the red rope, they aren't highlighted like the white rope above, if you see what I mean. So I think the one thing to be conscious of is if you're painting, that is obviously a material. If you've got multiple versions of that on the model, and they might be made with the exact same material or whatever, but if you're trying to make something read as an item, then if you've got other stuff there, you should try and paint it the same as it in the sense of execution. So where all the raised areas on the white one are highlighted, you can see them on the chest. All the raised bits on the red one should also be highlighted as well. It just keeps that continuity of execution. And I think that's something just to be conscious of when you're looking at your miniatures and when you're painting.
Yeah, I think consistency is really, really key across the entirety of a miniature. Like, it's one thing to be consistent across a force, but I think when you're looking at one model in particular, on an army scale, obviously it gets a bit difficult, but when we're talking about just like individual miniatures and improving your painting, it is really, really important to treat every area of the model with the same amount of care and attention to detail as you do with other parts, because like I said, it can give a false impression that your painting is worse than it is, because stuff that's painted okay stands out because it's next to stuff that's painted great.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. One final thing to note as well, I think that this model was really demonstrated the improvement of your brush control. And I think a couple of things, I mentioned the scratches already, but I think like if you look at the tilt shield as well, that lovely, even though there's obviously a sculpted fist detail, I think where you've executed the half and half split on that tilt shield with that perfect vertical line, I think you've done a really great job on there, obviously. So keep practicing your brush control, because all of that practice that you put in is only going to lead to even more consistent, sharp, refined work like what you've been demonstrating already.
Yeah, but overall, fantastic entry. It's been really great to see your improvement and all of your improvement in the Discord. So we look forward to seeing what you do next. Okay, last but not least, of course, we have C Merchant, who says, messing about trying to do non-metallic metal. I think it looks okay, but not particularly happy with it. I'm pretty tempted to go over it with metallics. Should I persevere with the NMM?
So another model which is close to my own heart, so I will try and turn bias down. But
a lot of blood angels today.
Yeah, a lot of blood angels today, which is never a bad day. But really well executed. I think first and foremost, the color choices on the model are really, really great, as in like the vibrancy of the red, the vibrancy of the blue, and also I'd even say like some of the brighter areas on the non-metallics as well, like the yellow classic primary color triad, which works good. I really like the wings. I think I was saying to you earlier, George, like the desaturated kind of color on the wings, just to really, it frames the model. It doesn't take away from the main focal point, which is a miniature, but then you can still see that it is highlighted. And
yeah, there's still some like blue, like cool tones in there to highlight and break up all the sort of individual segments. So it's not completely flat either, but it's still like nice and dark, which I think adds a lot of contrast value to the miniature as well. Yeah,
which is really good. So the first thing I think that sprung to mind when we had a look at this and got real down into it is that I think that you said specifically about the non-metallic, so we'll just cover that to start off with. And again, just want to caveat, I'm no non-metallic master, like I've done the odd little thing here or there, but I'm just purely going to look at this from the purpose of blending, and I think that one of the things to actually talk about is just the there is a bit of texture on a lot of the metallic areas, and it definitely shows that like with other stuff that you paint on the miniature, like you're not causing loads of friction or overworking areas, but it appears that non-metallics that potentially that's the case, and that's just because there is a bit of a roughness and a bit of a thicker nature of the paint in those areas.
I think potentially that comes from that being outside of their comfort zone compared to the rest. So I think perhaps I would assume, based on looking at this miniature, you don't struggle with, base coating the flat colors on and blocking in details of the model.
Yeah.
But where the NMM is perhaps a little bit more difficult for you and you're trying to push yourself, which I absolutely commend you on.
100%.
It's a little bit of probably back and forth, I think, that you might have done with color choices and blending. And I think that has sort of resulted in the texture because that paint is sort of being overworked. And I think you're probably going back over areas multiple times, whereas you're potentially not doing that with, like the red is, you can see on the shoulder, nice and smooth and neat, similar on the chest armor, and with the black, I'm not really seeing any texture.
No.
Even elsewhere, not quite so bad on the knees either, or on the belt.
So the way to combat a lot of texture when it comes to doing blending is really, first and foremost, is to have a bit more patience with it. Like obviously you want to get to the finished result. You want to have the blended armor panel or section or area or whatever it is. But I think you need to just dial back the speed a little bit and really focus on the actual every single brush stroke and seeing what difference that actually makes to the surface of the miniature. Again, creating a transition is lots of thin layers, and you can't just go from one color to the next color with a perfect transition in a few brush strokes. It does take quite a lot of work to get those thin layers and build it up. Also, don't forget the thing that we mentioned quite a lot, which is obviously friction. Like try and be a bit more softer and a bit gentler with the brush strokes. Like don't be scrubbing the surface and moving the brush frantically or really quickly. Obviously, you are creating friction.
And if you aren't entirely happy with what you've done, it's best to wait and let something dry completely rather than reworking, because, actively drying paint can be just as detrimental to sort of overwork as well.
100%. Yeah. I think the other thing which really stood out to us is the edge highlights on the miniature. Now, there's a lot of areas of the model where you've edged stuff consistently, but I think specifically on the non-metallics, the edging is a bit not random. It looks and appears that it's just been painted at either the sharpest areas or the highest areas. For example, the upside down shoulder pad, you've done that kind of upside down L shape, and the edge is obviously just doing that. There's no inner pad highlight on the other side of the trim. And same on the wrist. If you look at the wrist at the top of the arm, you've got obviously like a highlight stage on that sort of like van brace part, the edge of the van brace, but there's no edge on the vertical bit of gilding or the bit that runs down the trim on the inside of the arm. If you're going to edge highlight, I'd probably recommend edge highlighting everywhere, because in that way it keeps it uniform in its appearance and consistency. The other thing to just touch upon is just the thickness of the edge highlights as well. Like there are certain edges on there which really vary in the thickness of them as well. And I think the thing that George, you noted quite like immediately when we looked at this is that the highlight stages are almost like a white or a slightly desaturated white.
They're quite stark, aren't they?
Yeah,
I think I would have, if you consider the white or ice yellow, whatever this is going to be the brightest color. We're not really seeing I can see a tiny little bit of it creeping in here on the elbow pad, but I think it's an overuse of the brightest highlight. I think it kind of loses the contrast effect because there's so much of it. Like when it's used sparingly, just on sharp little corners, just a little hint of it here and there. It has
more impact by it.
Less is more.
Yeah, because it's so saturated and so bright. Like a really good, if you're liking that kind of style of non-metallics, like I've mentioned, a really good example model is like the non-metallic Sanguinor model. If you remember Daz or Darren Latham's Sanguinor model, like the white or ivory that's used on there is very sparing, and it's used for catch points and sharp areas of the edging. And that really kind of like frames the blending and also draws the eye to those points because of the vibrancy and because of the brightness of those catch points.
Yeah, I would have done this with, if you was going to like do all of these edges in the same place, that's all well and good. But I would have used, a brighter yellow and then picked out, just some of these bright corners, like where I'm indicating with the mouse here. With that white, I wouldn't have done it everywhere because I think that's kind of detracting from it, like I said. And it's making it appear like quite a lot more desaturated as well, because it's quite a vibrant yellow, but sort of from a distance, this whole area sort of reads as quite pastel-y.
Yeah, I agree completely. As I said, I think there's a lot of really good painting on this miniature. And I know we've commented about a bit of texture and obviously, so just the edging and stuff. But like, for example, the knee pads with the bone or the skulls, I think they're done really, really well. I love the colours that are used in there as well. I think there's some really nice, good tones, and it really does read well as bone, which I think, again, as we always say, it's a plastic model. You're trying to convince the eye that it's not plastic, it's something else. I think you've done a great job with that. So yeah, really, really well done.
Yeah, some nice basing textures and colours here as well, like sort of the little lava effects. The stone looks nice, and it's a nice contrast as well, because it's sort of that dusty, weathered look. We've already noted on the wings as well. Some really sharp, like lightning effects and stuff on the blade. I think that looks really cool.
Yeah.
And there's some nice blending, it appears, on there as well.
Yeah.
So overall, some really good points. And again, really commend you on trying to execute the non-metallic metal, because it is quite a hard look to pull off. But hopefully you'll have learned from this one. And I think don't be discouraged. Like with the next one, I think just try to take what you've learned from that and then apply that to the next one. Well, a massive thank you to all of our patrons for submitting their miniatures for this week's episode of Critique Clinic. And we hope that even if your miniatures weren't featured, you've hopefully learned something that you can implement into your painting and hopefully improve as well with us. If you would like to get your miniatures featured on a future episode, check the link in the description of this video to our Patreon. As well as Critique Clinic, you'll also gain access to hundreds of high quality PDF and video tutorials. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.
Thanks so much. See you all very soon.